What is a farmer's almanac?
Almanacs are really calendars, and it really has something for every day, whether it was holidays, where the moon is, other astronomical calculations. Always it was full of agricultural information of the moment, so it was like useful and new.
This week, we are going to be talking to the editor of the oldest continuous publication in North America. Think about it for a second. See if you can guess the one that I am referring to. It's a gardening show, so you might have a clue already. Yes, we are talking to Carol Connare, the editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. It's really cool to have you on, Carol.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So can we just briefly, the Old Farmer's Almanac is almost like in the fabric of our society, I feel like. No one who doesn't garden probably even knows what it is, but they know of it for sure, right? And I think the cover is really iconic. The name's iconic. What would you say it actually is? What is a farmer's almanac?
Oh, that's such a good question. Almanacs are really calendars. I mean, that's when we started out 200 and almost 33 years ago. That's really what it was about. I mean, there might be another book in the house at the time. That was the Bible. And this was really about every other day of the week in a way. And it really has something for every day, whether it was holidays, the moon, where the moon is, other astronomical calculations, tides, when to start things. But then always it was full of agricultural information of the moment, so it was like useful and new. So all the time from the beginning, the editors from the beginning were always looking at, what are people wanting to know? Where is maybe the science leading us? And, what have we learned from experience? So it's a place to share all that knowledge from year to year. And again, just that useful and new is and entertaining. Those are part of our mission, those three words.
How did it begin? Origin story, like the very first almanac, like who decided to create it? How did they compile this information?
Again, that's a great question. And they go back further than us. So Benjamin Franklin was an early almanacker. And so they really, in this country, go back to when I think, the Europeans settled this country. They brought them with them. And then they started making them for regions and for different places where people had settled. And so Robert B. Thomas was our founder, and he was really one of he had a lot of ingenuity. But, he also took information from other almanacs. I mean, it was really kind of a copy and steal sort of a thing, except for him, he was super into astronomy and looking at astronomical observations and using that to predict the long-range weather. And so that's really where the difference of our origin story is. And also Robert B. Thomas was super interested in having some entertainment in there, people, right? You got to get through this year. And yes, you do have to grow all your own food and life is hard, but at the same time, something to smile about, something to think about. And so I think that really set us apart with the weather predictions.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but did basically every home that needed to grow their own food, which would have been most people back then, have a copy of the almanac?
Yeah, I think it was very affordable. We looked back and some of them, these were sold sometimes by peddlers, that would have everything else on their cart. So they would set the price. But the first prices we found were pennies, really, really affordable. And so, yeah, I mean, they were prevalent. And why not? It's something that for, pennies really, and today even at, $10 is a super value, is something for every day of the year plus. So yeah, they were in a lot of homes.
How would it be possible back then to map long range weather? I know obviously astronomy pretty well discovered at that point. Even moon phases and patterns and tides probably. How would someone back then though have known perhaps if it was going to rain in 10 days or not?
Yeah, they didn't really, except they had a lot of observations to go on. And so, depending on the food systems and the weather was really what people were doing at the time. And so they didn't really know day to day, but there was a lot of phenology. Like they could look at things like, if there's a lot of ways to tell, like things about if the moon is rising at 2, is that going to be a moist day following? There was a lot of patterns. But really what happened for us is that even the formula we used back then is what we use today. God bless you. And it has to do, they didn't have climate science and meteorology such as it was, but it's really the sun science and the sun spotting and the sun cycles is what Robert B. Thomas was innovative in putting on top of that data. So to be honest, we use the same formula he used, but now we are, we have the blessing of so much data, you can't even count it all. But it really is the same formula. And the difference for us is in what he did. So, and he did predict as we do for each day. And that's really looking at how the sun cycles are affecting those other two sciences, climatology and meteorology.
How does the sun cycle affect climatology and meteorology? I'm not familiar with like sort of the deep science of that. And to me, it's fascinating. I always love the stories of, call it like, I guess, in the Enlightenment era of when all these new things were discovered about the world. Just to me back then, thinking about being the person who figured that out is fascinating. To piece that together, because that would have been the most revolutionary idea, let's say, at the time, right?
Cool. Yeah.
And so how does that actually tie together?
So the sun cycles, I don't know if you know about them, we're in sun cycle 25, and a lot of people have been hearing about it because it's a wicked strong cycle here at its end, and that's why the aurora borealis is being seen a lot further south, and we've had some of these solar storms, and so people are kind of cluing in, like that's sun science. That is what's happening. And so each cycle, we're in cycle 25, and each is about 11 or 12 years long. And so as they go, you can look at a graph, and they very much fluctuate in the same sorts of waves. And so what happened was then we could take all that data and say, okay, in another year 7 of the sun cycle, in an El Nino or what have you, or these other patterns happening, what happened? And then predict from there. And that's really how the sun spotting or sunspot activity, solar cycle activity plays in. It's looking at, again, that long game of that is one of the elements, but we're really mostly interested day to day in our, the forecast for a few days from now or even a few weeks from now, but that's about it. But this is really about that longer cycle and saying, hey, that happened before. And so what does it look like now this year?
Might happen again, or in some probably sort of different way, it might fluctuate based on other conditions. Is it true that the Old Farmer's Almanac has sort of the most robust historical data on weather patterns in at least our country?
Well, we have probably the most robust predictions, but really NOAA, is keeps everything. In fact, we take their data and from other organizations, and again, use our kind of proprietary formula for how we do the long-range weather. But I think we have, the longest running history of, again, I say predictions and how that, and what we've used, those calculations are all there. So you could take that over time and, we say we're 80% accurate. And that really depends on where. I mean, the weather has been kind of unpredictable in a lot of smaller places. So, or it would be interesting to look at that over time, how things have changed actually in the predictions, as well as what's happening. But I think that's what we're seeing is that we're needing to make more calculations that take into effect warming, but also greater precipitation in smaller amounts of time. And we're starting to see trends that are, so say the prairies, which are both, U.S. and Canada, and those areas are actually seeing a later winter and like a fall, like a summer hangover into fall. And so those are patterns that, again, are a newish, but they're really connected to this solar cycle.
What I can say, at least just living in one geography and gardening in it for 10 plus years now, what I've noticed in San Diego, which should have a decent, like a medium level wet winter, not that wet, and then really no rains at all in the summers, we've had much more compressed windows of rain in smaller periods of time, and actually more overall inches of rain in winter. And then we've also started to see storms in the summer once or twice, nothing too crazy,
Yeah.
but like once or twice, which is unusual, which is sort of breaking with pattern and also causing interesting, I guess, biological shifts. Let's say we had the CEO of the San Diego Botanic Garden on, and he was mentioning that these midsummer rains are kind of messing up the native reproductive cycles of all the natives in our area because they're not used to that.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty fascinating. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool to hear the history behind a publication that's, I guess, so iconic in our society. Really, there's a question that we've been asked here at Epic Gardening many, many, many times, and we're actually talking today, Carol, about moon gardening, which I think has a bit of controversy or perhaps a bit of questions and speculation around it. Perhaps we could even just first address, what do people really mean when they say moon gardening or gardening by the moon? Because I think that's the part where they get off the rail right away.
Sure. Yeah. And well, of course, moon gardens are white gardens so that at night they glow, which is really nice, which is totally different, but they do glow under the moon. But gardening, according to the moon phases, I guess would even be the more exact way to put it, is really thinking about that 4-week cycle, that 28-day cycle of the moon, and coordinating activities according to that cycle. The reason underneath it is exactly what we see the moon do if you live on the coast. You see that it pulls the tides. And so essentially that's what's at work when we think about gardening by the moon phases. So the idea is that we're water, and plants are water, and there's a ton of water in the earth, in addition to all the open waters and lakes and seas that we have. And so that the moon is also affecting the water in us, in our plants, and in the ground. It's groundwater, right? Kind of basic as it is. And so for the Almanac, this is something that's been in the Almanac since the very beginning. And many people have told me they've learned to garden according to the moon phases, and that actually some of them didn't really believe it, but they just did it because it gave them a nice way to organize what you do. But the truth is that it's, when we think about the days of the week, the names of the month, so much of that is based on the sun and the moon. That's how people told time. And so in addition to the idea that there's this water table, it's also just how we cycle through things. So yeah, for the moon, so what we're talking about is during the time when the moon is increasing, when it's waxing. That is the time that the water table is being drawn up. And so that's, according to gardening by the moon, is when we want to plant things that are above ground, things that produce their fruit above ground and their seeds inside above ground. So things like, I was going to go through my list here, just things like, arugula, basil, broccoli, cabbage, anything that's really above ground. And so then the best time to do that, and it's really about 3 days before the full moon, is all of those things that are, we want them to grow up. And then right around the full moon, everything's at its height, but then it starts to wane. And so that's when we want to concentrate, according to planting by the moon phases, on working on things that we want to go into the ground, whether those are below ground crops, we're transplanting, we want things to build roots. And so the idea is that second part of the phase is we do that. And really, that the very end, the last quarter of the moon, when it goes to new moon, is almost a time to do none of that, to really dry your herbs and seeds, to maybe make a plan, cleaning up, and not really putting things in the ground, waiting for a few days after the new moon is new. And so that's just the kind of basic idea of how it's done.
So the logic there being, the moon affects all matter effectively because it exerts a gravitational force upon all matter. The one that's easy to see would be the tides, because water is a fluid and thus it can more easily move according to that. So like the force, it's not as well opposing the force of the gravity that the moon's exerting. Because I'm water, but so my house is partially water, but it's also mostly not.
Right.
And it would be pulled as well by the moon, but it's just stronger. The force opposing it is stronger, so you don't see it ripping off the earth. So you're sort of saying that like the water table under the ground, perhaps shifts upwards or something like that.
It does. The water,
Thus,
yep.
thus perhaps making it more easy, let's say, for plants growing above the ground to, I
The water's
suppose,
going in the right direction.
it's going in a better direction. And then
Yeah.
when the moon is waning, uh, water effectively in the table or in the soil is being pushed further down to the Earth's core, I suppose,
Exactly.
or perhaps not being pulled up as
Yes.
forcefully, one or
Just
the
being
other.
drawn down.
Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah.
The thing that
Just like
attracts me to this is it's almost the opposite of that. It's almost the system. The 28-day cycle is also a
exactly.
really nice way to just meter out time. Um, and of course there is that effect of the water. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely something about this that I think gets people either really excited or kind of like scornful of the method. It seems
Yeah,
like, right?
right. Is it too prescribed? And there's other ways to twist it too. Though I just want to say as a note, it's astronomical, not astrological. There's plenty
Mm.
of other, and also there's a whole nother layer you can layer on astronomical zodiac signs, when the planets are in certain positions that also affect our planting, and kind of add on other layers that are almost could give you something for every day of the moon cycle. That would be like, this is really a better thing to do this at this time. But I think just laying out the basics is exactly what you've described. It's the moon's pull on water, no matter where it is. And so plants are something like, 80 to 90% water. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see the sort of scientific logic. Cause like you're saying, it isn't astrological in the sense of you're sort of, no offense to anyone out there listening, but you're sort of just like imputing human desires onto the
Right.
movements of planets. In this case, I perhaps would have questions about the net effect, let's say, of a
Mhm.
waxing or waning moon on the water. And does that really make enough of a difference to
Right.
change my planting, perhaps? But I wouldn't deny, let's say, that it does actually have a gravitational effect. Like that's just objectively true via the laws of physics itself.
Sure. And I think, as I've had a number of people say to me that I really liked it. I started out at first because it just gave me a great schedule.
Hmm.
And, as you said, it really does. And it's kind of like, well, for those of us who don't really like to weed, it's like, hey, that last that last week of the phase is a really good one to weed. Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I should be doing. And it might get you to that chore a little quicker. But yeah, I think that people do have some doubts about it until they try it. And then, there's lots of anecdotal evidence, of course, that, you'll get bumper crops. But again, I think it's just this idea, like a lot of people, well, you hear about it all the time. Like, I can't start my seed. Sometimes seed starting is the hardest thing. And
Hmm.
I will say that that's where I've seen some converts is, okay, I'm going to look at this moon-based thing and get my seed started. And my seedlings all of a sudden are super happy. So
Hmm.
then they become like, okay, what's up with this? Like, I'm going to try a few more things.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, look, I mean, I'm all for experimentation and seeing if something works for especially for you. That's what I've kind of learned with the garden is like to not gatekeep a method. And if there's a method I may not even like or use myself, or maybe I've sort of gone to a different one over the years. Like I used to grow in hydroponics all the time.
Right.
I don't do it as much these days. I don't hate the method. It's just I don't have a need for that method right now. Um, I'm all for it. I think the more people get in gardening, the better. And if the moon phases is attractive to you, honestly, there's something pleasing to me about organizing the planting on the 28-day cycle versus a calendar cycle because it's consistent to itself. It's not a human-made cycle. The moon is the moon. It's doing what it's doing. That is kind of an interesting way to think about it. So who knows? Maybe we'll have to do an experiment on our YouTube channel and test it out and see what we can find. But I'd be curious to anyone listening what they think about moon gardening. If you have any experiences, feel free to shoot us an email. Tomatoes is a topic, Carol, I think everyone has an opinion on. Everyone has a hot take, and everyone has their own flavors, literally, and also styles of tomatoes that they like to grow. So I kind of am curious if you have a tomato hot take. Like, do you have something that you think about growing tomatoes or a particular variety that you just feel very passionately about?
Oh, I'm all about the heirlooms. I love heirloom varieties. I think they do better. I feel like I can grow them I just put a ton of those kinds of varieties in my garden personally. But like you said, I think that people are really all about the taste, but I also really like the taste. I like that they add, they're kind of got their tougher texture. I like roasting them. I like doing roasted sauces with them. So to me, that's been the most successful tomato growing that I've had, because I think that, they're prone to that leaf rot and all the rest, but those seem to do really well. The heirlooms seem to be a little hardier on my end of things.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I would say I used to grow my tomatoes for aesthetic. Like I'd grow a beautiful purple tomato, or like, a sort of like yellow purple combo, etc. I still do. I mean, there's still maybe one or two, but these days I don't really care how they look. I care, is it the size that I want it to be for the purpose I want to grow it? And does it taste really good? And so I've kind of converted over to Jacques on our team. He's one of our gardeners. He's always been growing for flavor. He doesn't care about the looks at all. So I kind of moved a little bit more over to his side. But you guys must have a lot of questions about tomatoes, or like sort of funny stories that have come in over the years at the Almanac. So I'm curious if you have any, like, what do Almanac readers think about our beautiful tomatoes?
Oh, they can't get enough. They can't get enough tomatoes. And then actually in our garden guide this year, we have a story about what types of tomatoes make good salsa, or for snacking, or for going in salads, and what holds up a little bit more in a picnic salad versus if you're going to be making, you want that big beefsteak tomato if you're making some grilled cheese. So it's really about the use. So I like what you're saying. It's about what's the end game on that. It's not just about beauty, but it's about really enjoying them, and also having them, as for us, like having them a little longer, because, store-bought tomatoes really stink. And so, that idea of how can we start them earlier, and what varieties do better. And so again, I feel like I'm more successful with those, but I think that's our readers, they want to know everything about tomatoes. This is our gateway vegetable. Like, it's where a lot of people start. And then it's where they also get the most frustrated, I would say. And I think some of that has to do with crop rotation. You've really got to move those tomatoes around, in my experience. They're, same with every other crop, but I think they really benefit from having fresh ground every year, fresh good dirt. Yeah.
So you do rotate every year?
I do for my tomatoes. I might have to go next year back, but I definitely do. And I certainly keep, I do follow a lot of what we say, which is keeping those families of vegetables rotated, so you're taking all those brassicas and moving those, and, and so on and so forth. So that's what I do. But, and yeah, I think there's a lot of tips and tricks that we hear. Like, there's a lot of whacked hacks, shall we say, on the internet. But, the tried and true stuff is what our growers are looking for. But I wanted to tell you a funny story we have coming up in our next almanac, which comes out in the fall. And I don't know if you know this, but until the 60s, you really had to hand harvest all tomatoes. And that was because when you picked them, they didn't break off at the stem. They broke off one joint away. And so no one could figure out, there was only one tomato known. It was in the Galapagos Islands that didn't have this breaking joint. And so, of course, the rush to have a commercially harvestable tomato was a big push. And so a researcher went to the Galapagos and got the seeds, but he couldn't get them to start. And he realized some seeds have to travel through a digestive system to be able to shall we say, germinate. And so he knew a couple with some Galapagos turtles in their backyard, and they ingested these seeds and out they came. And that is how we got tomatoes that can be commercially harvested, because it
Wow.
did end up being able to hybridize. We call it cleaning up the joint. They really had to take care of that. And so ever after, we had the canned tomatoes.
I had no clue. I mean, I knew that to save your own tomato seed, of course, you have to ferment them.
Yes.
In their own juice is one way you can do it. Which just sort of acidifies, which is kind of the same thing as going through a digestive tract. Jacques actually likes to save his own seeds, so he'll do that sometimes, of heirlooms at least. But I did not know about the breaking joint. And especially for it to come from the Galapagos, which as a kid, I was obsessed with the Galapagos Islands. I don't know what it was. Like, I did reports on it in school. I wanted to go there. Actually, my great uncle and my great aunt at one point did go to the Galapagos. And I remember asking them like millions of questions. What did you do? Like, what did you see? Was there a turtle? Was there a Galapagos whales, whatever? But it's fascinating to me that they would have found it on an island that remote. It's just kind of interesting.
I know. Unless like next time you have a BLT, like let's all have a moment of turtle appreciation, because we wouldn't have this wonderful commercial tomato market, which we depend on when we can't be growing our own.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, most people, that's their knowledge of tomatoes is, the slicer at the store. And
Yeah.
that's pretty much it, which is sort of a sad thing when once you learn how to grow a tomato, I think I would say it's the plant that you grow in the garden that you never want to go back to the
So
grocery
true.
store. Like if you got a potato, frankly, I still think homegrown potatoes are way better, but I could understand the logic of some, it's a potato, whatever. Tomato, no, it's just dramatically better. It's like at least twice as good if you grow it at home.
Agreed.
Varieties wise, do you have a couple faves? I know you said you're big on the heirlooms.
Yeah, I love the tie-dyed ones, and I love what are they? The really yellow ones? Are they the German yellows? I think they are. Those are some. I love those ones. I actually love the ones that kind of reseed from my compost pile. Like sometimes I'll just put fresh compost out, and then I'll find a stray volunteer. I let those grow out just to see. I feel like those must be really hardy, and they just tend to be a indeterminate round, medium size. I use a lot of Roma, so I do grow those. But I would say cherries are, I grow majority cherry tomatoes.
Oh, you do? Just like little salad guys?
Yeah, but I roast those into sauces and I put those up for the winter. So I like the flavor, I like the sweetness. I feel like they really last once you freeze them.
Okay, yeah. I just put in, I would say 15 or 20 San Marzanos.
Oh yeah, those classic, right?
Yeah, on a 2-foot spacing, and I did bamboo poles. I'm just going to stake them straight up, and the whole goal for that particular part is sauce. That's just sauce. So now I've gotten to the point where I used to grow tons of varieties and sort of just see which ones I liked. These days, I have 2 different tomato gardens. I have my sauce garden, which is totally separate to my indeterminate, either cherries, slicers, or like beefsteaks. They're all in the same one. But I don't rotate as much as I probably should. I think I tend to not rotate much, but unless I notice like there's an issue. So for example, last year I grew garlic in a back plot, about 250 heads of garlic, got garlic rust on it. And so I was like, there's no way I'm growing them even in the backyard. I put them all in the front yard this year.
Yeah.
And no garlic rust. So
Yay.
that was a good move, And tomatoes, I noticed, I've played around with spacing a lot. So instead of like moving the crop itself, I've like composted over the winter, and then I've just spaced them wider so that they're not touching either the soil or themselves as much. And that's has helped.
The biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that might be the biggest. I think I used to try to cram and do like 1 foot spacing. Now I do about 2 foot, 2 foot minimum spacing between the tomatoes. And I just don't get as much blight or anthracnose or any of these sorts of diseases that can hit your toms.
I know we all want to that's the problem. We all want to put so much in. That's what and then just to say that just doesn't work. It really doesn't. They like their space, but I think amending is great. I mean, I think you're talking about really amending for those tomatoes. They like that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're pulling so much matter off of that plant, really, when you think about a tomato, that to not improve that soil, especially if you're growing it year after year, you're not rotating like I'm not, then probably not the best strategy for growing big ones year after year, right?
Yeah.
And you were just saying, Carol, that you kind of have a new life, I guess, right? You're moving to a new property, it sounds like.
I am. It's exciting. I feel like I'm inheriting someone's project. It's this guy Brian has been working on this permaculture orchard for about 12 years, and so it does have a house, but most of us don't really care about that part of it. So yeah, it's about a half acre, and it's got many things I'm familiar with, and a few that I am not. So. But things like a hardy kiwi, so we don't get the regular kiwi here, but a hardy kiwi, and this thing has gone wild. So that's been an overproducer. Tons of raspberries and blueberries. We have I don't know if you have autumn olive where you are.
No.
It's an invasive species around here. But there's a cultivar in this orchard that isn't invasive, so that's good. Persimmon, pawpaw, cherry, Asian pear, English pear, currants, aronia, chokeberry. So a lot of a tune tree. Have you ever heard of a tune tree? It puts
I
out
haven't.
little green leaves that you can eat in the spring. It's an Asian tree, and mulberry, nettle, comfrey, goji berry, gumi berry.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. And this is all, so whereabouts in the States are you?
this is in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Okay. And then how much space are you on now?
This is only a half acre. So,
That
and
all
it's
that's in a half acre.
yes, and it's completely developed, the whole half acre. And then there's also a nice annual vegetable garden. So
Wow.
I have my learning cut out for me, but it's really been a different experience just diving into it. Like I didn't understand there's a lot of wood chip technology in
Mm.
terms of creating the mushroom, the mycorrhizal networks, and using hardwood to feed those trees every year, hardwood chips. So that's been a new thing for me. And I'm used to like being a clean, neat, and tidy gardener, but permaculture is more about kind of using everything in the garden if possible. So even when you take off those spent raspberry, putting those, as your mulch instead of tossing those or getting rid of those in a compost pile. So it also comes with a worm colony.
Oh.
My realtor was very excited. He had never had to put worm colony into a sales agreement before, and he was just thrilled about that.
That's so funny. Yeah. So, and how long have you been there for?
I'm moving in a couple weeks, so I've been
Oh,
trying to
wow.
learn and work on the garden and work in the annual garden before I get there because it is high time right now for
Yeah, no
spring.
kidding. Yeah, it's May. So what kind of gardening were you doing prior to this? Like what would you say your style was?
Big vegetable garden, really
Yeah.
like in the ground. Some a little bit of containers, a little bit of a raised bed, but mostly I just had an immense vegetable garden. And I had been living at my home I have now that I'm leaving. A lot of ornamentals, a lot of beautiful fragrant shrubs, but not a lot of food trees. 3 really old apple trees that I've been bringing back. But you may know about that. I mean, you have to severely cut those guys,
Oh yeah.
and they don't produce, and they look really unhappy. But it's happy to say they had a lot of blossoms this year. So, and then pasture. I've had a lot of pasture, which is just annoying as all get out because it's just not growing anything. So, and I would say I'm also a forager. I like to forage for things around here. So, but yeah, mostly big vegetable garden.
Got it. Yeah, and so this would be a pretty big change then, because not a lot of fruit trees in your past.
Exactly. Well, I where I worked prior to this job, I was part of a team at UMass Amherst. So we would volunteer. We would take care of our gardens at the library where I worked, and that had some fruit trees outside of it, cherries and some other food plants like chokeberry. But really, the students were mostly interested in like that's a food plant. The whole place was an arboretum, but very little of it focused on food, though they had started to develop a food forest, and I taught food writing, and we would go see that with my students, and it was coming along. So I had a sense of it, but I think the care of it is the new business for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say before I moved into my home, I effectively had not really grown fruit trees at all. I had a couple in smaller containers, like a 10, 15 gallon container. It doesn't really count, in my opinion, for like large scale orchard culture. And now I think I have, oh man, I think maybe 20, 25 different types of fruits, not all trees, some vines, some bushes. And it's just a different style of gardening. You're
Yeah,
totally right. Like you're doing a lot in a little amount of time, like your spring pruning or your fall pruning. Like it's important to do that for sure. And you have to kind of take the time and spend, I don't know, and really you could spend quite some time mastering the art of the prune if you want to,
right.
or you could do like a more quick prune. We had Tom Spellman out to the homestead. He's one of the guys at Dave Wilson Nursery. He kind of popularized backyard orchard culture, which is the method I'm using. And I sat there pruning a tree with him, it was peach tree. And he's like, you could stop now, or you could keep going. And if you kept going, here's what you would do. And then like 10 minutes later, we could stop now, but we could keep going and we would do this. Right. And he
Interesting.
kind of showed me the master sort of theory on how to prune. And then I found it really almost peaceful. I would go out in early spring, let's say, or
Yeah.
late fall, and I would just sit there with my Felco shears and just hit all those things. It was very, very satisfying. And I also agree, like it it's just a slower time scale of
Yeah.
gardening, and then you also have to kind of be okay with things maybe not looking aesthetically perfect all the time, especially if it's deciduous, right? It's going to fall and there's going to be nothing there. So yeah, I'm excited to hear kind of how that goes in your, I guess, your first true season, right?
Yeah. I mean, I bought it in the season of the sticks, as we call it around here. So it didn't look like much, but I could tell. Yeah. That's so interesting about the pruning. That's the thing that I've been really reading up on. There's so many pointers, but then at the end of the day, you need to get in there. And I love what you said. It's so true. It brings you into the garden at different times of the year and on a different schedule. That's a good way to put it. That's what I'm sensing now when I'm thinking about the different kinds of ways to care for it. The thing that I love is that it's super producing. And one of the visions Brian had was to share the food. And so, it's definitely at that point. And so I'm excited about that. Like you said, you're going to have to meet little kids and have them come pick the hardy
Oh yeah.
kiwi and they won't be able to stop eating the raspberries. And so hopefully have a little free fruit stand at the end of the summer.
With all the plants you mentioned, there's no way you'll be able to eat it all yourself. So you're going to have to run a little Carol, you pick mini farm day or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed even for me, like the citrus, which for me, I can grow a ton of different citrus varieties. It's tough to perfectly use all of them, especially 3 years in, now that they've actually started to really produce. So like my lime tree, my lemon tree, that's great because I can just kind of leave them on until I need them. But man, when the oranges come through or 5 of the different oranges that I have, it's like, okay, well, I can't just eat these all the time. So I got to have some friends, which there are plenty that want that.
Do you get multiple blossoms off of your lemon tree, or do you just get a one? Yeah.
Yeah. We tend to. I think I've got the Meyer lemon, which has a pretty wide window, and I've noticed with citrus, unlike my peaches, my nectarines, my pomegranates, etc. Like those ones tend to be like a month max window, whereas citrus tends to be longer, especially in our climate. And it's a longer hang on the plant, so I can leave a ripe lemon on a bit longer than I can leave a ripe peach on.
Absolutely,
which is great. And then we've got an avocado that hangs over. Actually, I started 2 avocado. I've tried and killed 2 different rounds of avocados. I finally got this 2-pack to set, but that's going to take a while to produce. But fortunately, my neighbor has an unnamed avocado that's the best I've ever tasted in my life that just hangs over the fence. And so I've gotten the okay from them to take whatever comes over the fence. And avocados are like a true long hang where they can sit, and then whenever you pull them, they'll accelerate their ripening. And so we'll have like 3 months maybe worth of avocados off of that, which is great. But honestly, I want 12 months. So I planted some that like stagger the ripening. So I'll actually have hopefully a full year worth of avocado.
That's awesome. That's so fun. I'm trying not to be jealous that you can grow citrus and avocado.
Yeah, but hey, you've got all the stone fruit in the world up there that
we do.
I have like 3 I can grow with a reasonable amount of success. But so we talked at the beginning of this week, Carol, about just kind of the origin story of the Almanac, and I think we hinted a bit at what's inside it. But if you picked up the 2024 Almanac and thumbed through it, what kind of elements would you find, and how would they, I guess, help you in the garden?
Sure. Well, as we talked about, it's a calendar. And so in that way, it's really talking about what are the things that growers need to do throughout the year and what are we looking at? And oftentimes we are looking at the weather. So that's definitely the big part of it. But we also have kindred spirits in terms of things like we have lots of astronomical information, what's in the night sky, what are the events like this. Of course, the eclipse in April was really big, but we talk about any of the different kinds of things that are happening, whether it's, the moon or the sun being eclipsed or partially eclipsed. We have lots of like nature stories, food stories connected to the garden. Folklore has been part of the Almanac since the beginning. And that's sort of an interesting category. You don't see a lot of places outside like folklore places. And then husbandry, we old farmers, new farmers often are with animals. And so we always talk about different kinds of husbandry things that are, happening and focusing on that. We do farmer profiles, really trying to just get under the skin of what's happening with large and small farmers in North America. As you mentioned at the beginning, anybody who's connected to the earth right now is seeing a lot of differences over the years and decades. And, and that translates if you've got some multi-generational farmers, they're looking at new ways of doing things. And so they turn to the Almanac again for that new and useful, but also that tried and true. So we have a big mix of those things. We always have things about animals. We have lots of amusements because from the beginning, again, this might be the only book in the house besides the Bible. So we wanted to have a few pastimey things like games and puzzles. And that's all still part of the Almanac. And also, like, we kind of call it the gee whiz or like wacky thing. Like you can find lots of things on the internet, but you can't find it curated and researched like you can in the Almanac and sort of our special take on things. And that's part of the we try to entertain.
Do you remember the series of books called, oh man, it's like the bathroom reader or something like
Whoa.
that? Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but I'm sure that we get read in the bathroom.
Yeah, so it was a series of books. I'm not getting the name right, but my great uncle had it, the one who went to the Galapagos. Every time I went up to his cabin for the summer, there'd be these bathroom readers. I think maybe that was what it was called. But either way, like, it was basically all the gee whiz stuff in one book. So it was like if Reader's Digest was wackier and had like interesting stories and facts, it was that was the whole book. Even in the footer of every page, there'd be a fun fact on every single one. So the Almanac to me feels like, I mean, if we're thinking about when it first came out, obviously there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no what are the entertainment sources is the written word really for media. And so you guys were putting out kind of a compendium of useful knowledge and then fun knowledge, and then like maybe even a book that could get passed around to family or, father to son or mother to daughter, whatever. Okay, cool. So that's the Almanac. I've got the 24 one coming to me soon, but then you guys have started to put out other publications as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have we're really, in a way, we're a calendar company. We do many calendars. We do a moon calendar. We do the gardening calendar is our most popular calendar, which probably wouldn't be surprising to people. We do planners, garden themed planners. This year we come out with a journal. Our book series, our handbook, our gardener's handbook series. We've had our flower, veggie, and we just came out with containers, and now we're working on indoor gardeners, which will be like largely houseplants, but also we're all growing all kinds of things indoors. So, that's every other year we do a book. Obviously, almanac.com is tons of free pages. Like there's many, lots of things out there for that. And I think to me, my favorite thing is that we hear from readers of all those publications. So in the Almanac, we have an essay contest and we have a recipe contest. So we get between those 1,000 entries and people telling us things, but also just daily on our website and in our queries, we hear from people, and that really informs what we put out as products. Like our handbook series, people really wanted pages to write in them and to record what was happening in their gardens year to year. And so we did that, and that's really popular. But then we were thinking journals. People really want actually this other place to record things that's really mostly about that, but has some inspiration and some information. So I'd say that we're lucky in that we constantly hear that feedback across those products, and that really helps us just really respond because we're growers too. So, we want to hear what it is that our readers want.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a cool compendium of knowledge. Carol, it's been really fun having you on the show and learning about the history of the Almanac. I actually did not know that it was as storied as it is. Certainly like embedded in American culture, I feel like, in a way that maybe we don't even fully appreciate. So hopefully, you guys listening learned a little bit of something. I know I sure did. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.